The first time I realized my family had replaced me, I was staring at a Thanksgiving photo I was never supposed to see. Everyone I loved was smiling around the table, while my seat had been given to someone else. But my grandfather was in that picture too. And the look on his face told me he had just discovered a lie that was about to destroy our family forever. My name is Claire Donovan. And I was 38 years old the Thanksgiving I discovered that the people I had spent my entire life sacrificing for had already decided I didn't belong anymore. The strange part is that I didn't find out because someone told me. No1 called. No1 texted. No1 forgot to invite me by accident. I simply stopped existing. If you had asked anyone in my family, they would have told you I was the responsible one, the dependable daughter, the sister who always picked up the phone, always showed up when someone needed help, and somehow always had enough money to rescue everyone else from their latest disaster. When my younger brother, Eric, lost his job for the third time in 5 years, I paid 3 months of his rent. When my older sister, Natalie, decided she wanted to open a bakery, I emptied almost half of my savings account to help her get started because the bank had refused her loan application. When my parents fell behind on their mortgage after my father retired, I quietly started transferring money into their account every month. They hated admitting they needed help, so I never told anyone. I didn't want them to feel embarrassed. I never asked for recognition. I never expected applause. I thought that was what family did. You gave when you could because one day, if life ever knocked you down, they would be there to help you back up. I believed that. Right up until the week before Thanksgiving. I lived about 2 hours away from my parents in a quiet little town where I worked as an accountant for a construction company. My life wasn't exciting. I wasn't married. I didn't have children. Most of my days were filled with work, grocery shopping, and checking in on people who rarely checked in on me. Still, Thanksgiving had always been important. It was the one holiday my grandmother had insisted belonged to everyone. Before she passed away 7 years earlier, she had made us promise that no matter how busy life became, we'd gather around the same table every November. My grandfather, Harold, took that promise seriously. He was 79 now, stubborn as ever, and still lived in the old family house where my grandparents had raised their children. Every year, he would call me a week before Thanksgiving and ask exactly the same question. "You're bringing that pecan pie, right, sweetheart?" And every year I laughed and told him that nobody else in the family even liked pecan pie. "I do," he would answer. "That's enough." That simple tradition meant more to me than I ever admitted, maybe because Grandpa was the only person who never made me feel like I had to earn my place in the family. This time, though, his call never came. At first, I didn't think much about it. People get busy. I figured he had forgotten. So the Monday before Thanksgiving I picked up my phone and called my mother instead. She answered after the third ring. "Hi, Mom. I was just wondering what time everyone is coming over on Thursday." There was a pause, not a normal pause, the kind of silence that happens when someone is trying to think of the right lie. "What do you mean?" she asked. "For Thanksgiving," I said, smiling to myself. "I just need to know when I should leave if I want to beat traffic." Another pause, then she let out a small laugh that sounded forced. "Oh, Claire, we actually decided to keep things very small this year." I frowned. "What does that mean?" "Just your father and me. Your brother might stop by for an hour, but that's about it. Everyone's busy." I looked at the calendar hanging on my kitchen wall. That didn't make any sense. Natalie always hosted her in-laws on Friday because her husband's family lived out of state. Eric had nowhere else to go. My cousins had been coming to Grandpa's house every year since before I was born. "You're not doing dinner at Grandpa's?" I asked. "No," she answered quickly. "He's getting older. We didn't want him dealing with all that stress." The explanation felt wrong somehow, but I couldn't explain why. "Oh," I said quietly. "Well, maybe I'll drive down and visit Grandpa for a little while anyway." This time, her answer came too quickly. "He won't be home." "He won't?" "We're, taking him to visit your Aunt Linda." I knew my mother was lying. I had no proof. No evidence, just a feeling that settled in the pit of my stomach and refused to go away. After we hung up, I stared at my phone for almost a minute before opening Grandpa's contact. I almost called him. I should have called him, instead. I convinced myself I was overthinking everything. Families change. People get older. Traditions fade. I told myself not to make a problem where there wasn't one. Thanksgiving morning arrived cold and gray. I baked the pecan pie anyway. Halfway through, I even laughed at myself. Maybe I was being ridiculous. Maybe Mom was right. Maybe everyone was just tired this year. I wrapped the pie in foil and decided I'd drive to Grandpa's house the next day instead. Around 3 o'clock that afternoon, I made myself a cup of coffee and sat down on the couch with my phone. I wasn't even looking for anything. I was just scrolling. Then I saw a new post from my cousin, Amanda. "So thankful to spend another holiday surrounded by the people who matter most. Underneath the caption was a photograph. 12 people stood in front of my grandfather's fireplace. My parents. My brother. My sister and her husband. My cousins, their children. Even Eric's new girlfriend. A woman I'd never met, they were all there, every single one of them. My eyes moved slowly across the picture. I counted the faces once, then again, then I noticed the dining table in the background. It had been expanded to fit everyone. 12 chairs. 12 place settings, and sitting between my grandfather and my sister was a young woman I didn't recognize. She was sitting in my seat. I know that sounds childish. It's just a chair, but families have traditions. And in our family, I had sat beside Grandpa every Thanksgiving since I was 15 years old. After Grandma decided I was the only one patient enough to listen to his old stories without interrupting him, someone else was sitting there now. As if I had never existed. My hands started shaking. I clicked on the picture. A few comments had already appeared underneath. One of them was from my mother. A perfect day. So peaceful this year. Another was from my sister. I wish every holiday could be this drama-free. Drama-free. I read those two words over and over again. Was that what they thought of me? Was I the drama? I hadn't argued with anyone. I hadn't caused a scene. I hadn't even known there was a dinner to be excluded from. Then, before I could stop myself, I looked at the very edge of the photograph. My grandfather wasn't smiling. Everyone else looked happy, but he was staring directly toward the camera with a strange expression on his face, confused, almost angry. And then I noticed something else. His hand was resting on the empty arm of the chair beside him. My chair. As if he had expected someone to be sitting there. As if he had only just realized they weren't, before I could think. My phone rang, the screen lit up with a name I had been wishing to see all day. Grandpa. I answered immediately. Happy Thanksgiving, I whispered, trying to hide the crack in my voice. There was silence on the other end. Then I heard him ask a question that made my entire body go cold. Claire, why didn't anyone tell me they weren't inviting you? And before I could answer, he said 5 words that changed everything I thought I knew about my family. Your mother told us you were dead. I couldn't breathe for a second. I honestly thought I had heard him wrong. My hand tightened around the phone so hard that my fingers started to ache. What did you just say? My grandfather's voice was quiet, but there was something underneath it I had never heard before. It wasn't confusion anymore. It was anger. I asked your mother where you were this morning, he said. She told me you had called a few days ago and said you didn't want anything to do with this family anymore. Then she looked at me and said. He stopped, swallowing hard. She said you were gone to us? That you had moved away with some man and wanted everyone to forget about you. I closed my eyes. Grandpa, that's not true. I know it isn't. His answer came so quickly that tears filled my eyes. I knew the moment she said it. You made your grandmother a promise before she passed. You told her you'd never miss Thanksgiving unless you physically couldn't get there. I remembered that promise. Grandma had been lying in a hospital bed, holding my hand with what little strength she had left. No matter what happens, Claire, don't let this family fall apart. I had spent 7 years trying to keep that promise. I just hadn't realized I was the only one. Grandpa, I whispered, I didn't know there was a dinner. Mom told me everyone canceled. There was a long silence, then I heard him let out a slow breath. I thought something wasn't right, he said. When everyone arrived this morning, I asked where you were. Your father wouldn't look at me. Your brother changed the subject. Then your sister brought that young woman over and sat her in your chair. The woman next to you in the picture? Eric's girlfriend. I remembered her now. Eric had mentioned dating someone named Julia, but he had never introduced us. I asked why she was sitting there. Grandpa continued. Your mother smiled and said, it's time we stopped saving seats for people who don't care about family. I felt something inside me break, not all at once, slowly, quietly, like glass cracking under pressure. Grandpa didn't say anything for a few moments, then he asked, did you really not know? No. Nobody called you? No. You didn't tell them you weren't coming? No. He went silent again. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. It was steady, calm, the kind of calm that only comes before a storm. Claire, I think they've been lying to both of us. I barely slept that night. I kept replaying the conversation in my head. I looked at that Thanksgiving picture at least 20 times, noticing details I had missed before. My sister's smile looked forced. My father wasn't looking at the camera. My mother stood in the center of the group, one hand resting on Eric's shoulder as if she were presenting him to the world, and Grandpa looked like a man who had just realized he had walked into a room full of strangers. The next morning, I woke up to 3 missed calls from him. When I called back, he answered immediately. I need you to come over. I sat up. What happened? I found something. His voice was low enough that I could barely hear him. Something your grandmother left behind. I drove to his house that afternoon, the entire 2-hour trip. I kept expecting someone from my family to call. An apology. An explanation. Anything. No one did. When I pulled into Grandpa's driveway, his old pickup truck was parked outside, but none of the other family cars were there. He was waiting for me on the porch. The moment I stepped out of my car, he wrapped his arms around me. He hadn't hugged me like that since Grandma's funeral. He held me for a long time, then he stepped back and looked at me. You look tired. I laughed softly through the tears. I didn't sleep much. Neither did I. He led me inside. The house still smelled like cinnamon and roasted turkey. The Thanksgiving decorations were still hanging above the fireplace. I noticed the dining table hadn't been cleared. Yet 12 chairs, 12 plates, and there, exactly where it had always been, was the chair beside Grandpa. My chair. He saw me looking at it. I told them not to touch it after everyone left. I looked at him. Why? Because I knew you'd be sitting there today. I almost cried again. Instead, I sat down while he disappeared into his study. A minute later, he returned carrying a small wooden box. It was old, scratched around the edges, with brass hinges that had faded over time. I found this while I was cleaning out your grandmother's closet last month, he said. I was saving it for Christmas because I thought we'd all be together. He opened the box carefully. Inside were photographs, old birthday pictures, Christmas cards, letters tied together with a faded blue ribbon, and beneath them all was a leather-bound notebook. I frowned. What is it? Your grandmother's journal. I looked at him in surprise. Grandma had kept journals for years, but after she passed away, my mother had told everyone they had been donated with the rest of her personal belongings. They weren't donated. Grandpa shook his head. Your mother took them. I thought she'd put them in storage. He opened the notebook and turned several pages before placing it in front of me. I looked down. The handwriting was unmistakable, neat, careful, every word written by my grandmother's hand. At the top of the page was a date, November 24th, 7 years earlier, the week before she died. I started reading. I worry about Claire. She carries this family on her shoulders and doesn't even realize they're letting her. Harold says I interfere too much, but a mother knows these things. Eric always calls her when he needs money. Natalie only visits when she wants help. Even Margaret has started depending on her more than she should. Margaret. My mother. I kept reading. Yesterday, I overheard Margaret telling Richard that one day everything will belong to Eric because Claire doesn't need anything. She called her the responsible one again. I hate that phrase. In this family, responsible has become another word for convenient. I stopped. What does that mean? Grandpa sighed. It means your grandmother saw what was happening long before I did. He pointed to another page. I turned it. This entry was written only 2 days later. I finally spoke to Harold tonight. I told him that if anything happens to me, he needs to make sure Claire isn't taken advantage of. I don't think she understands that she is loved for what she gives, not for who she is. My vision blurred. I blinked away tears and turned another page. There was one final entry, shorter than the others. The handwriting was shakier. If you're reading this, then I was right to worry. Claire will never ask for fairness because she believes love means sacrifice. If our family ever turns against her, Harold, promise me you will tell her the truth. Promise me you won't let them rewrite her place in this family. The page ended there. Grandpa looked out the window for a long moment. I promised her. I wiped my eyes. But why would they do this? Why would Mom tell everyone I didn't want to come? His expression darkened. I don't think Thanksgiving was the reason. What do you mean? He hesitated, then he stood up and walked over to a cabinet. In the corner of the room. He opened a drawer and pulled out a large envelope. I wasn't going to tell anyone until Christmas. He handed it to me. Inside was a copy of his will. I stared at him. You showed me your will? I changed it 3 months ago. I looked down at the papers. Most of it was legal language I didn't understand. Then my eyes landed on a paragraph with my name. I read it once, then again, and then I looked back up at him. No. He nodded slowly. Your grandmother wanted the house to go to you. I couldn't believe it. But Mom always said the house would stay with the family. It is staying with the family. He gave me a sad smile. You are family. I looked back at the document, the old house, the property. Grandma's antique collection, everything she had specifically cared about preserving. It had all been left to me. But nobody knows this. His face grew serious. Oh, I think someone found out. A cold feeling spread through my chest. What are you talking about? 3 weeks ago, your mother came over while I was meeting with my lawyer. She wasn't supposed to hear anything, But I think she did. The pieces started fitting together, the strange phone call, the fake story of being excluded from Thanksgiving, replacing my seat at the table. It wasn't about avoiding drama. It wasn't about a smaller dinner. It was about pushing me out before the family. Learn the truth. As if reading my thoughts. Grandpa nodded. I think they believed that if they could convince everyone you abandoned the family, nobody would question it if they challenged the will. Before I could answer, there was a loud knock at the front door. Grandpa and I looked at each other, then another knock, harder this time. He stood up slowly and walked to the entrance. I followed a few steps behind. The moment he opened the door, my mother's voice echoed through the hallway. Dad, we need to talk. Then she saw me standing behind him, the color drained from her face. For a split second, nobody moved. Then my brother stepped forward from behind her and looked directly at me. His expression wasn't guilty. It wasn't ashamed. It was furious, and the first words out of his mouth made it clear that Thanksgiving had only been the beginning. I told you she'd come back the second she found out about the will. The words hit me like a slap. I told you she'd come back the second she found out about the will. For a moment, I just stared at my brother. Herrick stood on the front porch with his arms crossed, my mother and father behind him, and my sister off to the side, avoiding my eyes. The same people I had spent years helping now looked at me as though I were the one who had betrayed them. I couldn't believe it. I looked at my mother. You told them? I asked quietly. She recovered quickly, folding her arms. You weren't supposed to hear about any of this. Grandpa stepped forward before I could say another word. No, he said, his voice sharper than I had ever heard it. She wasn't supposed to find out that her own family had been lying to her. Nobody answered. The silence stretched across the porch until my father finally cleared his throat. Dad, maybe we should discuss this privately. Grandpa didn't move. We will. Right here. Right now. He stepped aside and held the door open. Come in. The atmosphere inside the house felt completely different from the day before. The dining room table was still set, but now it looked less like a place for family and more like a courtroom. Grandpa sat at the head of the table. I sat beside him. Nobody said a word about it. My mother took the seat across from us. My father sat beside her, while Eric dropped into a chair with obvious irritation. Natalie stood by the window for a few seconds before quietly taking a seat at the far end of the table. No one looked comfortable. Finally, Grandpa broke the silence. I want one person to answer one simple question. He looked directly at my mother. Why did you tell everyone Claire chose not to come to Thanksgiving? My mother's expression didn't change. I was trying to avoid a fight. A fight? Grandpa repeated. She hasn't been around as much lately. Eric and Natalie both felt uncomfortable. I thought one quiet holiday would be good for everyone. I couldn't stay quiet any longer. You told me Thanksgiving wasn't happening. She looked at me. I thought you were busy. You told Grandpa I abandoned the family. I never said that. Grandpa stood up so suddenly that his chair scraped loudly against the wooden floor. You absolutely did. The room went silent. Again, he looked at each of them one by one. I asked where Claire was. You said she had decided she was too good for this family. You told me she had moved on and didn't want to be contacted. My mother opened her mouth, but he raised his hand. I'm not finished. His eyes shifted toward Eric. And when I asked why Julia was sitting in Claire's chair, you laughed and said, some people are easier to replace than others. Eric's confidence vanished. I was joking. No, Grandpa said quietly. You weren't. I looked around the room. I had expected someone to apologize. I had expected tears, excuses, maybe even regret. Instead, all I saw was annoyance. As though I had ruined their plan by showing up. Then Eric leaned forward. Can we stop pretending this isn't about the house? My grandfather turned to him. What did you say? You heard me. Claire doesn't care about Thanksgiving. She cares that she found out she's getting everything. I laughed before I could stop myself. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind that comes when something is so unbelievable that your mind refuses to process it. I didn't even know there was a will until an hour ago. Convenient timing. I looked at him. Do you know how many times I've paid your rent? His face tightened. This isn't about that. Do you know how many times I lied to my own friends because I was embarrassed to admit I couldn't go on vacation or buy a new car because I was helping you? Nobody asked you to do that. I stared at him. No. You just called me every time you had a problem and expected me to fix it. He looked away. For the first time, I realized something. He didn't feel guilty. He felt entitled. Grandpa slowly reached into the wooden box that still sat on the table. He pulled out a folder. I was hoping this conversation wouldn't be necessary. He opened the folder and spread several papers across the table. The bank statements, copies of checks, wire transfer receipts. My mother's eyes widened. I recognized them immediately. They were records of almost every financial transfer I had made to the family over the past 7 years. Grandpa looked at me. I started keeping copies after your grandmother passed away. I frowned. You knew? I knew enough. He pointed to one page. $8,000 for Eric's rent and debt payments. Another page. $12,000 for Natalie's bakery. Another. Monthly transfers to your parents for nearly 3 years. My father looked down at the table. My mother didn't. She was staring directly at the papers. Grandpa's voice remained calm. Do you know why I kept these? Nobody answered. Because your grandmother was afraid this family had confused love with obligation. He picked up one receipt and held it in the air. Claire gave without expecting anything back. Then he placed it on the table. And all of you took without ever saying thank you. Natalie suddenly started crying. I didn't know, she whispered. I turned toward her. What do you mean you didn't know? She looked at me with red eyes. I knew you helped sometimes. Mom told me you were investing in the bakery because you believed in me. I felt the air leave my lungs. I looked at my mother. You told her that? She stayed silent. I looked at Eric. What about you? He shifted uncomfortably. Mom said Grandpa was helping with the rent. Everything became clear. For years I thought I had been carrying the family. For years they thought someone else was paying the bills. The only people who knew the truth were my parents. I looked at my father. Did you know? He closed his eyes after a long pause. He nodded. Yes. The disappointment I felt in that moment hurt more than Thanksgiving ever could, because my father had always been quiet. I had mistaken his silence for kindness. I finally realized it had been cowardice. My mother stood up. Fine, she snapped. You all want the truth? I'll give you the truth. She pointed at me. Claire never needed us. I blinked. What? She was always the smart one. The responsible one. The one teachers praised and neighbors admired. Everything came easy for her. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You think my life was easy? You had opportunities. Eric struggled. Natalie struggled. They needed support. So you used me to provide it? I did what any mother would do. I protected my children. I stood up too. I am your child. For the first time all afternoon. She didn't have an answer. Her grandpa slowly sat back down, then he reached into the wooden box one last time. He pulled out a sealed envelope. The paper was old. And across the front, written in my grandmother's handwriting, were 6 simple words. For Harold, if they forget. My grandfather opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a single letter. He read it aloud. If you're hearing these words, then my greatest fear has come true. I always worried that Claire would spend so much of her life taking care of everyone else that no one would remember to take care of her. If our family ever reaches the point where they measure her worth by what she can give them, then I want her to know something. He looked up at me, tears filling his eyes, then he continued. Claire, you were never born to carry this family. You were born to be part of it. If they make you feel alone, then the failure belongs to them, not to you. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. The only sound in the room was my mother quietly crying. Grandpa folded the letter and placed it back inside the envelope. Then he looked at the entire family. I've made my decision. He stood up. I met with my lawyer yesterday morning. My mother's head snapped up. What? I changed my will. Eric leaned forward. You changed it? Grandpa nodded. I did. The room was completely silent. I am leaving the house exactly as your grandmother wanted. He looked at me. To Claire. I opened my mouth to protest. But he gently shook his head, then he looked back at the others. As for everything else, he paused. The money I plan to divide among the family will be used to repay Claire for every dollar she gave to keep this family standing. Eric shot up from his chair. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious in my life. Natalie lowered her head and started crying again. My father looked defeated. My mother just stared at Grandpa as though she didn't recognize him anymore. He wasn't finished. After those debts are repaid, the remainder of my estate will be donated to the children's hospice where your mother spent her final months volunteering. He folded his hands. And if any of you have a problem with that, you can explain to her someday why kindness was only acceptable when someone else was paying for it. The weeks that followed were strangely quiet. My mother called dozens of times. I didn't answer. Eric sent a long message saying it had all been a misunderstanding. I deleted it. Natalie came to see me in person. She apologized for believing the lies she had been told and Admitted she should have asked more questions instead of accepting the version of events that was easiest to believe. I forgave her. Forgiveness didn't fix everything, but carrying anger forever would only let the past keep hurting me. As for my father, he wrote me a letter. It was only 2 pages long. He admitted he had known the truth for years and had stayed silent because confronting my mother would have torn the family apart. The sad thing was, by staying silent, he had helped destroy it anyway. The following Thanksgiving, I didn't wait for an invitation. I didn't check my phone. I didn't wonder if anyone would call. Instead, I spent the morning in my grandfather's kitchen, making a pecan pie while he pretended not to steal pieces of the crust. A few close friends joined us that afternoon. Natalie came too, bringing a loaf of fresh bread from her bakery. The old dining table was smaller than it had been the year before, but somehow, it felt fuller. Before we started eating, Grandpa stood and raised his glass. He looked around the table, smiled at me, and said the words I think my grandmother had wanted me to hear all along. Family isn't made of the people who share your name. It's made of the people who make sure you never have to earn your place at the table. And for the first time in a very long time, I realized I wasn't mourning the family I had lost. I was finally learning how to cherish the one I still had. Never confuse sacrifice with love. The people who truly care about you won't make you prove your worth, and the ones who deserve a place in your life will never make you feel forgotten.